Hello, guys, and welcome back to the Think Connect podcast. Today, I'm joined by our first ever guest from the US of A. Julie hosts her own podcast, which is called Make Your Damn Bed, which is a daily motivation podcast to get you out of bed. She is an ex-school teacher who taught fifth graders for 3 years and is also currently a comedian based in Chicago, Illinois. So, Julie, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Nick. I really appreciate it. I'm excited to be here.
Fantastic. So am I. So the title of the show was we're going to aim in the direction of like being financially independent and maybe how to get there. But I also know that since your podcast is a daily motivation podcast, it would also be cool to maybe dive into a bit of personal development, as this podcast is also going to sort of, go in that direction as well. So the first question I want to ask you is basically, before we get into the financial independence, what was your first entrepreneurial adventure?
I've always been a little bit of a hustler. I feel like my family, we grew up kind of poor. So my family taught me the value of $1. They're like, if you want it, you need to pay for it. Figure it out. So I used to make handmade crafts like wallets. I would staple together paper and write Julie's wallet on them as if people wanted my name on it, and then walk around the neighborhood and knock on people's doors and sell them. And then they would just throw money at me and say, please keep your trash. Here's your money, cute kid, which this was a different time. This was like, you could just knock on random strangers' doors and ask for money. And I got real lucky with it. But I realized then that I needed a job that was like not minimum wage. And if I really wanted to like make it, minimum wage jobs weren't going to cut it. So I wanted to be a server right away. I wanted to find jobs where I could kind of quote unquote hustle or like find loopholes to finding more money. And I think I was just always like that, selling whatever, kind of like kicking around ideas with how I could like be a theater kid and charge my parents for tickets to watch my play I created with my cousins. I feel like I've always been trying to like make a few bucks. I used to charge my brother to make me make him sandwiches and things like that. Come to find out years later, he was taking money from my piggy bank to pay me, but that's a whole nother story.
Fantastic. Cool. So it sounds like you've always had the entrepreneurial gene, ingrained in you. So
yeah, I don't love money, but I do love having it. So
yeah, absolutely. So that leads me to the next question is, you were obviously an ex-teacher, now you're a comedian in Chicago, and you have your own podcast. So do you want to touch on that?
Yeah, it shows you how little I care about money, I guess. I was a teacher, a comedian, and a podcaster, which are all known for being very successful gigs. Honestly, I also have ADHD, so staying like actually enamored with something long term so that it's sustainable is really difficult for me. So in my experience, having things like that I was passionate about was number one, and then that also paid my bills was number two. But I find that they all kind of lean into each other. Like there's a lot of performative aspects of teaching that I think that people don't think about. And then when you go into comedy, you can use all of those other things. And to me, comedy was always an outlet, never a hustle. And while you can absolutely hustle and make some money and figure it out, it is a different type of grind that I was just not mentally prepared for. But I've learned a lot from each of them, trying to make each of them a career and realizing how much easier jobs are as they get better pay almost. I think that's
Yeah.
I feel like that feels like I'm diluting it a little bit, but like in the sense that the expectations become less physical, I guess.
Yeah. It's almost like, that saying, you need money to make money. And then when the money starts flowing, it's like becomes easier and easier and easier and easier to make money.
100%. Most of my ideas, I feel like when I was younger, I would get really frustrated because I'm like, if I had money, I'd be a millionaire. You know what I mean? Like, and I don't need $1 million to make it, but you usually do need something to give you that leverage into it. And I find that like most of the jobs I chose, I started from the ground up and really had to figure it out from there.
Exactly. So you're a comedian and you're a podcaster, and this is your living, right? So why don't we talk about when you decided you were financially free? How did you know, basically?
For me, I have always felt financially free compared to my parents because I had a really terrible model, right? I had people who struggled paycheck to paycheck, got fired from jobs that they were living paycheck to paycheck in, and then had no paychecks. And so literally like bankruptcy from young age and all these things and scrounging. So for me, I've always been the wealthy one in the family just by not having debt. And to me, that's always been a goal of mine. And I don't know if that fear was a good one to like send me into like extra scared, don't get into any debt kind of thing. But I treated debt to be so respectfully. And I talked to a financial advisor recently for the first time, just asking what was going on and explaining all of my things. And I don't have many assets. I have a 2004 Kia. I've got like an apartment I rent, right? I have some computers and cameras for my photography side hustles or whatever. But really, in the scheme of things, I don't have a lot of assets. And in our country, the US especially, our financial freedom is built on debt, right? Like they want you to
Yeah,
have a
for sure.
house and these assets. And I told him, I was like, I feel like I'm richer because I have money in the bank and I owe $0 to anybody than most of the people that I'm aspiring to be rich like. And he explained to me that while that is true, it is also not true in this specific country. Like you need to have both. And so I'm finding the balance between those to be really difficult personally. But I think it was just a fear, right? Like I saw it modeled terribly. So I went the opposite direction. It's very much the poor dad, rich dad, poor dad. And I had poor dad only. So I went
Mm.
middle ground, I think. So I've always felt a little bit financially free, but I find that those jobs kind of just kept me afloat for a lot of it. I think that's why I moved out of teaching, to be honest, because there was no way to make more money in it. Whereas like comedy and podcasting, if I expanded, it could grow with me financially.
Yeah. It's funny that you say that because I'm exactly the same as you. I've only just got a credit card now. And
Yeah,
we actually did a podcast on how to make debt work for you. So go check that out. It was one of the first podcasts that we did.
I
So
will.
yeah, like debt can be super powerful if you know what you're doing with money.
Yes.
Right? Yeah. So, but then also like for the I'm trying to squeeze as much value out of you as I can. So for the listeners, because I mean I've got a lot of friends who are teachers because I was a teacher. What advice would you give them to become financially free, or the first steps they should be taking, or the things they should be thinking about?
One, burn down the system and make it so that teachers get paid what they deserve. No, I'm sorry, that's ridiculous. But really, in reality, I want to say all the cliche things of like, pinch your pennies, make sure you're not spending more than you are, but or earning, and make sure that, what your goals are matching up with what you actually are making. But I also feel like that is one, a cliche for a reason because it does work, but two, it feels very victim blaming to me. Where if you really aren't making enough money, I do believe, I've always been a big fan of demanding what you're worth. And obviously, in the
Mm,
teaching industry and things like that, it's a lot different. But like, write down the things that you're doing on a spreadsheet. I know you need another job as a teacher, I'm sure, but write down the things that you're doing that are above your pay grade and above your job. They happen every day. Keep notes, keep timestamps, and then show those to your administrators at the end of the year and be like, this is worth this much. I'm only making this much, and maybe demand it. I also find that that probably won't work in a school system that is already
mm,
struggling for money. So, finding side hustles that you're really passionate about, but that don't deplete you from teaching. I also think things like, what is it called? The passive incomes. So, like, you're a teacher, you probably have lesson plans already sitting out. Go on those teacher websites and sell them for $1 or Pinterest and have whatever you're good at. Don't force it to feel like an extra chore or an extra job because that's not sustainable, but whatever you're already a master at and you're teaching, whether that's your actual lessons, the teaching you do with the kids, like film yourself, just yourself, not the kids, but like put that on TikTok and then have people Venmo you with like there's ways to really slide anything into a hustle if you think about it from a hustler mindset. And while I don't think that should be your responsibility, your teaching is enough and you're amazing for being a person that does that for our community. I do
mm,
think, at a certain point, we have to get real with the fact that teaching doesn't pay enough. And we really need to
mhm,
figure out how to bridge that gap, whether that be with something that can supplement or whether it be finding a way to get what you are owed. Or living below your
Exactly.
means, which sounds hard for a teacher.
Yeah, it does. Well, the lifestyle that I was living in Vietnam, because it's obviously the cost of living. I mean, the states will obviously be very different, but the cost of living there is fairly cheap. So we could afford to travel and save and live a great life because, like I said, the cost of living is so cheap. But having said that, I mean, as you know, as a teacher, when you get to I think 12 years teaching experience, you're capped and you're done.
Yeah,
There's no scale there, and you can't really do much out. And again, demanding to your bosses is not going to help because they'll just get another teacher who specialized in that subject and just replace
that's
you.
the thing. And they do
Yeah,
that a lot anyway. The second you start moving up pay grades, they say it's easier to pay a new teacher that is
exactly.
unqualified. It's really sad. The whole system's
It
messed
is.
up.
It is. And teachers should really be paid the most. I mean, you're
The
dealing with a classroom of
most.
like 20,
The
30 kids.
future. And
I know.
you are unleashing these heathens onto the world, you know, like we're the ones responsible, so we should be credited and at least respected. I wish teaching was more respected as really not even the pay. I just wish it had a little more
Yeah.
respect.
Yeah,
Sorry, the
that's so
dog's making
true.
noise.
That's all right. And then touching on, the side hustle part of things, this could be valuable for anyone who has not thought about actually doing this, but I know there's a website called like Teachers Pay Teachers, and I'm sure there's many
Yes,
more. And you
I've
can
used it.
create your like yeah, exactly. So like the stuff that you're really good at and you specialize in, develop content and put it on those websites. Because I think at my old school, out of all the teachers that I knew and that obviously I knew of, there was only one who actually sold her content online, her math content online. And it's like, I know we're busy and I know it can be a stressful job, but it's like on your weekends or something in your free time, it's like a no brainer. You already have the content, the lesson plans, just put it online and sell it for like a
Yeah.
dollar. You
Or
know what I
go like
mean?
Or go tutor at a rich school. Like, I worked at a school where I'm not gonna hustle the other teachers and I'm not gonna hustle the other parents because I know they don't have the means. But I would tutor on the weekends because I liked working with kids. Like, I wanted to
Mm,
tutor. I also needed the money, unfortunately, but I wanted to tutor. So I tutored for like richer neighborhoods and then they gave me better gifts. Like, it's kind of messed up, like the whole capitalistic game of it. But it's true, right? We do have to kind of think about what our assets are, what we're good at. And to me, the number one thing, if somebody while I was teaching said, "Here, also go add these to a website and do," I'd be like, "No, I do not have the time." But I'm sure there are plenty of tech savvy kids or people in your life that would love to upload that for you and
yeah.
show you how it's done, you know? And I'm sure you can find a kid in your class and give them, you know, a little bonus time that doesn't like lunch or whatever that can come sit in and help you out with like uploading. So if any of that's too intimidating, asking for help too, asking what other teachers are doing, finding people that you admire doing a little bit better than you, I think is really important because I found people I admired that were not doing better than me and I went to them for advice. And it was just the same advice I had. So to me, it was really about looking at people who were doing what I was doing on my level, but like maybe a step above where I wanted to be and finding them and just picking their brain, you know, offering them a cup of coffee or a baked good in return for some assistance with like, how
Yeah,
do I do this? What can I do to make this a real sustainable thing?
absolutely. Yeah. Obviously now you're financially free and you're a comedian and you're living the life that you want to live. What were the biggest challenges to getting to being financially free?
I had a lot of time privilege that a lot of people don't have, right? I don't have a great family, so I really didn't have that holding me back either, in the sense that I didn't have anyone with expectations of me. So I got to lay low and be financially independent regardless. Like, I don't have children. And like I said, I don't have a ton of assets. So to me, that's a privilege. Time privilege is the
Mhm.
number one thing that we can be afforded. And I think that it's often overlooked. And to me, time privilege is our number one asset more than money, more than anything else. If you have time, you are the richest person in the world. If you have free time to
Mhm.
do whatever you want, however you want. And I think it takes a really diligent and force as someone with foresight to be able to like put that time into things that can also afford more time for them, right? To me, I think of financial freedom as time freedom. The more free time I have to do what I want, to create what I want, to get paid for my personality is the dream, and I'm doing it, right? Like, this took a long time, but to me, I think what got me there was the between times. There was a lot of low times, right? It took me 8 full years in Chicago before I made comedy where I wasn't nannying or bartending, right? Like, it took me 8 full years of not having 10 other side gigs. But I'm the type
Mm.
of person where my brain works great with a lot of stimulation and a lot of side gigs and a lot of hustle. And a lot of people don't like that. A lot of people like routine and structure. So it's really about figuring out what you can do, but remembering that that downtime, there were times when I thought I wasn't going to make it, when I was depressed, but I didn't have a choice. To me, being financially free while being a creative was my only dream in life. And it was the only thing I was going to fight for. So I was not going to stop until I made it or I die trying. Right. And to me, it was, I don't think it comes down to that. I don't think you have to have, oh, excuse me. It's our time to
That's all
meet. No,
right.
I'm just kidding. Yeah, I don't think it's about forcing yourself out of your comfort zone as much as being patient, but also consistent. Small 1% changes, like asking for help or seeing what you can do and just exploring those things. But I think once you get the like taste for it and just trust that eventually it will come. And I think a lot of the times, especially with skills, especially as a person who flutters from hobby to hobby, we feel like we're investing into something and then we bail on it, so we feel like we've lost that investment, but I disagree. I think that investment is still there. It might not be growing, but it is still there for you to, like, come back and attend to later. So, to me, it's about planting seeds that you feel good actually nurturing, and then nurturing those slowly, but also getting comfortable with the time where no sprouts are showing and you just have to sit and stare at your garden, and I don't know if this metaphor is working, but in my
Yeah,
head
no,
it
no,
is.
absolutely. Absolutely. And I agree with you. And I'm just referring back to teaching, like it's a very demanding job, right? So you get to
Yes.
Friday and you're like almost on burnout. And like I remember there's two things I want to touch on. And this is the first one is just me personally. I had a whole bunch of side hustles that I was trying. And the podcast is the one that I've actually been the most consistent with. And that's what I want to touch on is consistency. Because you're constantly working and you're constantly getting like a worn out, you get to Friday and like your weekends, like you said, time. And I love what how you related time to money and your and your outlook on, you know, you think you would rather have time than financial freedom, or you see financial freedom as time. But I really struggled with consistency. So I would
Same.
start something and then like a month down the line, I'd just be like, oh, okay, on to the next. Okay, on to the next. Okay, on to the next, you know? So I think like, and I want to say this to all the teachers out or anyone who's in like a really demanding job, is that if there's anything you can learn from me, it's to just stay consistent and touching on what Julie was saying, just small incremental gains, like that little 1%. You know what I mean? Because a lot of the times you get this idea that you want to start a side hustle and then you put all your energy into it and then you burn out after a month. But if you just start chipping away at it slowly
Yes.
every day, small incremental gains, I mean, the compound effect, you will eventually get there.
It's true. There is this theory too. I think it's I'm not gonna quote who it was, but, presumably some white man has said that if you stop before you get tired or get burnt out, then you're more likely to show up tomorrow, right? Like, when I want to work out, I'm terrible at being consistent with working out my whole life, right? But I go for 2 weeks real hard, and I'm like the queen of marathons, and then suddenly I'm like, "Forget it, I'm never moving again," and I'm a sloth. And I've learned if you go to the gym or do whatever you're gonna do for 20 minutes instead of 45, then you're more likely to be excited for the next day, and to me, I have been kind of explaining this to people in terms of my energy levels, because I do this a lot with like inspiration with creativity. I'll be like, oh my gosh, I have the best idea. So I'll go like till 4 a.m. working on it because I'm like, when am I gonna have this creative idea again? I need to use
Hmm.
this juice, right?
Yeah.
Like I need to spin this mojo. And then the next morning I'm like, I don't want to look at that project. Forget that. I'm throwing that in the trash. It's garbage, right? Like whatever I did at 4 a.m. was trash. And I don't want to address it again. Where if I stop myself at a normal time, I say, okay, it's 10 p.m., put down the pen, come back to it tomorrow. And I might need like a little bit of like wind up time, but I'm more likely to like not be burnt out on it, like you said, and not be overwhelmed and not want to quit. So that like trying to keep yourself balanced and recognizing it's a long game rather than like it's not a sprint. So, and also you were saying too, there's a lot of guilt that comes from starting projects and quitting, right? And not being consistent. But to me,
Yeah.
those really do add up to give you your personal values, to tell you what you're interested in, what you can do long
Hmm.
term, who you are. And
100%.
those skills aren't lost, right? Like you might have picked up crocheting for a month and given it up, but maybe in 20 years you're going to go, you know what? I do know how to crochet. Let me pull that bad boy out. And it might be the thing you needed. So I don't think there's anything. Our society just puts so much value on make value now. If you're not producing, you're a piece of junk. And I just don't agree with it. I don't agree.
Yeah.
I don't
You're
subscribe.
100, you're 100% correct. Like I enrolled in a course 3 years ago, like a lead generation marketing course. And I lost interest. I got burnt out after 6 months. And now I've created my own lifestyle program and I'm using skills from that course that I bought 3 months ago, this venture that I went
Yes.
on. And now it's actually adding value to something that I'm really passionate about and something that I'm actually really doing now, which is just awesome, right? It's
Yeah.
just amazing. Let's sort of dive into your podcast now. It's a daily
Okay.
motivation podcast. So if you guys want to go check it out, it's on Apple. Is it on Spotify?
Everywhere. Apple, Spotify,
Okay,
Google, wherever you listen, most
fantastic.
of them. There's like a couple that we're not on, but they're the low-key cool ones underground.
Nice. Okay, cool. So it's called Make Your Damn Bed. And how did it start? It's obviously about motivation, so there must be some personal development element there. So how did that all come about?
I have depression, anxiety. I had a lot of trauma growing up. There's all kinds of things. And I read a lot of self-help as a result. I read a lot about like optimizing your brain to be a good hustler. Like I did all of that. I got sucked into all of the self-help gurus and I got kind of exhausted and burnt out on that. Like there's a lot
Mm,
of to me, there's two types of self-help, and there's everything is fine and rainbows and puppies, and do not worry about the world's problems. Those are the world's problems. You're gonna be fine. Don't worry. And then there's the opposite where it's like, you're a piece of shit if you're not waking up at 4 a.m. and drinking greens for every meal. Like I think there's a balance, and I saw a window for that. But mainly I had been collecting. I've always been the like preacher friend to my friends. I've always been the advice friend, the one with the moral of the story, which is annoying for a lot of friends. But I also just find that like it's easy for me to come up with what am I supposed to learn from this? So I've been collecting these conversations that I have with friends that just nobody talks about, mental health stuff that I'm like, why is no one talking about this one? For years I'd been collecting, didn't know what to do with it, wanted to make a podcast but don't have the consistency. And then during the pandemic, I was struggling to get out of bed. And as a gig worker, I was struggling to find gigs and hustle on my own because it takes you motivating you to get out of bed and do those things. And I found that there was nothing Pavlovian to get me out of bed. And I don't know, I needed something short form, almost like a song or something to like, okay, when I hear this, I'm getting up and I'm going to start my day. And I couldn't find anything that worked. And I found a couple podcasts that were kind of aggressive, like I said, that I was like, maybe. And then I was like, I could do better. So I wanted more like Big Sister vibes that pretty much are just a Pavlovian response. You get up and you either make your bed or you put on your gym shoes and your day has started. You don't have to worry about it. I'm getting up with you, right? Like I can be that almost Pavlovian response to like make waking up easier. It's somebody to wake up with. And that's kind of where it came from, out of a really big bout of depression and way too much time on my hands with the
yeah.
pandemic.
It's usually things like that actually get started out of times of real struggle and difficulty. And the first thing I want to say is congratulations on the podcast and just well done for keeping it going, because I know just how hard it is to keep putting out good content consistently. Like it's not easy, and that goes back to what you're saying about burnout.
Yeah.
Like I'll be working, I've got other ventures, and then I'll be working on my podcast till like 8, I don't know, 10 p.m. at night. And sometimes you just need to hit the stop button and come back the next day and start again. And something that's really helped me do that is writing it down and making a list. So like if I don't get through the whole
Yes.
project, for anyone listening, I'm a writer. I like to write it and put it on paper. Some people can type it on their phone. Some people, I don't know, put it on their iPad, whatever. For me, I need it down on paper so that the
Same.
next day, all of those thoughts that are there when my brain is tired and burnt out, I can come back to them with a fresh mind the next day. And the job will 9 out of 10 times be better than it would have been, of course, the night before, and with fresh ideas and a new mindset and a new outlook on it. You know what I
Yes.
mean? More energy put
Yes.
into it. And then the other
I call
thing,
it oh, sorry. Go
no,
for
no,
it.
okay. And then the other
I
thing
call
is
it the
just
mise en place. Sorry, I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna do it.
go
I
for it.
call it
You
the
go,
mise
you go.
en place, where you like set everything up for yourself for the next day, like where like chefs do that, where they like they get the onions cut and everything. And when it's all set up for you, it's so much easier to show up and do it rather than being like, oh, I got to pull out the onions. I got to do this. Where you're like, oh, that paper is there with my script or whatever my idea was. It's just so much easier. You save yourself the trouble. You've already done the work. Just write it down.
Exactly. And like I've been bouncing around quite a bit recently from like place to place because of traveling and stuff. And when you are in one place and you're settled and you have a good routine, like that's when I find like I'm firing and I'm starting to get used to the life of like bouncing around and traveling. And just this week, I've learned another lesson, like write it down, because what happens is I was
Yes.
in such a good routine and then I would have all my lists for the next day. And now that I'm bouncing around, I'm like, you know, I use the excuse in my head, I don't have time to write it down, but that's just a complete lie. It's just a
Yes.
complete lie that I'm telling myself. So
Remind yourself you
literally
don't
this
have time
week,
to forget.
exactly. So literally just this week, I've started making my list. Like I've just made it a have to. It's a non-negotiable, and my productivity has just soared again like crazy.
Yeah, I think it's find your thing that makes you feel the most prepared, but also having a station for things like desk to be ready. And since setting up a space with like everything prepared here, my life has gotten so much easier. I was like, oh, wow, just having it out and ready. And it's almost like, yeah, when I look at my weed station, guess what I want to do? Get high. But when I look at my desk, I look at it and I go, "Oh my god, I actually do have some cool thoughts today and I could work." It makes it more attractive. It makes it easier to show up.
Yeah,
It takes a lot of that like it's like the out of sight out of mind. If it is in sight, you're more likely to grab for it. You're more likely to show up.
exactly.
So I think the listing is really just a great example of that.
Yeah, literally. And to all the listeners, you know, as you said, Julie, do what works for you, whatever it is
Yeah.
that works for you. Make that safe space, put those systems in place so that you're so productive and you're just making life easier for yourself, really.
Yes. Yeah, look
Yeah.
out for future you. Do future you a favor. Stop putting everything on future you and do future you a favor for once.
Yeah. So the journey that you've been on and the podcast, what are you most thankful for from this journey?
I I'm thankful for a lot of it. I'm thankful for my own persistence, to be honest, because I've never been consistent with anything. And now I'm 600 days consistently into this
Amazing. Well done.
podcast. And there have been times I get burnt out. I will say, I'm going to do a little derail. If anybody says follow your dreams, unless your dream is doing finances and figuring out how a business works and marketing and doing all these things, whatever you end up doing, there's going to be parts that are work, right? Like, even if you do your dream every day, if I became a stand up comedian, Jerry Seinfeld had days he didn't want to show up, right? Like, there's work is work. Anything that becomes an obligation, our brains suddenly go, this is too hard. So to me, I'm just really grateful to have a job that a past me would have died for, like absolutely fought for. And I think sometimes when I don't want to show up, I remind myself what a luxury it is to actually have this opportunity. And that helps to remember, like, oh, wait, this is actually a luxury to show up today. But I'm grateful for the time freedom to be able to show up and perform when I'm ready, right? Like there are days I don't feel creative. There are days when my voice just isn't, my words are jumbling, my brain is going a mile a minute and I just can't get it together. So I'm like, I'm not going to perform today. I'm not going to do that. And it's
Mm,
really great to have the privilege to say, not today. And I've never had that before in a job. I've always been on someone else's schedule, working for someone else's dream. And it's really nice to just be working for my own. It's taught me a lot about my own work ethic. I am burnt out from working for other people's dreams, so I don't show up as much as I probably should. But also, it's a long game. It's a long game. I'm taking my time with it.
yeah. And I love what you touched on there, basically. And it's a very key lesson I think the listeners should take away is to show yourself a little compassion. You know, on the days that you don't want to do it or the days that you feel burnt out, like, I mean, I strive to always get it done, but you just get, you know, you've got to be kind to yourself and you got to show yourself a bit of compassion. And then touching on the other thing, what you were saying, like working for someone else's dream and the side hustle thing, like sometimes you have to do what you need to do in order to do what you want to do. And what I mean by that
Oh
is
yeah.
like, you know, like that's exactly like a side hustle. You work the job because you need the income and you've got to pay the bills and you've got to, you know, you've got to eat or all your basic needs. And then the side hustle, you do that in order to work on the side hustle, and then hopefully one day, like yourself, become financially free and live the life that you really want to live. So it's a very important lesson to take away, that if you're feeling, how do I say, discouraged because of your situation, you're on the right path. You're right where you're meant to be.
Yes, I worked so many I wanted to work for myself my whole life since I was young. I wanted to be able to do this, but I also really don't discourage anyone who is comfortable working. Like, I would love to be a person who could be satisfied in a cubicle and leave that work behind. I happen to take on jobs like teaching and stuff where that there's always more to do. And to me, that's really difficult because there's no tangible end to it, right? Like, there's always students can learn more, there's always more work to be done. And those kind of jobs are really difficult for go-getters, right? Because there's no tangible finale, there's no closure. And to me, if I could be privileged enough to have the type of brain that could go to a cubicle, make my phone calls, make my money, and then leave it at work and then go home and live
Mm,
the life I want, that would be a dream for me. But it was just not, it wasn't in my cards. So there's nothing wrong with it. I never want to like admonish anyone for being able to like work towards someone else's dream, if that's what we call it. Like, that sounds so shady because it is a little bit, but it's also like, no, that's a privilege too. Like, recognize what you're good at. And if you're good at leaving your work at work, that's awesome. Like, lean into that. I think it really is about figuring out your own recipe for what makes you feel the most fulfilled and satisfied. And if something's been on your mind, like quitting this job and all you do at your job is research vacations, then maybe it's time for a switch, right? Like, that's what I found
yeah.
myself. It became like too much. It became to be like there was no other option. So when it becomes like that for you, then I think that's when you need to start redirecting. But I wouldn't do it just because other people are making this look glorious, right? Like, the podcasting industry sounds really cool. I have so many friends that hear that I do it and are like, "I have an idea. Let's do this." And I'm like, I mean, I'll do it with you, but also this is not what you think it is. Like, you're
Yeah,
glamorizing,
100%.
you're only seeing the highlight reel. And I think
Hmm.
we do that a lot. So really register what it is that you want, because I didn't even know what a podcast was when I became a comedian, and now it's my dream job. So
Mm,
it's more about just being open and flexible, but realizing what isn't in the cards for you and like going from there, I think, more than putting pressure on yourself to perform in a way that isn't aligning, I guess. This
great,
sounds
great,
convoluted.
great advice, Julie. Thank you. So the last question I'm going to ask you to part us with is, you're obviously an entrepreneur, and other people are striving or aspiring entrepreneurs, and they have startup businesses. So what advice would you give to those people?
Consistency is my number one. It's
Nice.
showing up, going in. Here's my thing too. Anything you want to do, you do not need formal education, probably, unless it's like you want to be a therapist or a psychologist or a social worker or something that actually needs a degree. But for the most part, YouTube University can get you a career in anything. I've learned more by just saying yes and trying things and failing on my own than I could ever learn in
Hmm.
a master class, right? And I think that just start planting seeds and then water those seeds, but also give them time, but keep an eye on it, right? Like do it like a garden, really. It's plant some seeds, let them be for a while, germinate when you need to, tend to it when you need to, pick weeds when you need to, but recognize that like a garden takes a long time to get to that harvest. And it's really not even about the harvest. The harvest is like the least exciting part. But in the scheme of things, there's a lot of waiting, there's a lot of prep, there's a lot of downtime. And I think like recognizing that your path, just because it's not like someone else's, does not mean you're behind. It actually probably means you're ahead, like mentally. Like, because I started later in life. I moved here at 27 to be a comedian, right? And that felt late. Everyone in my classes was in their 20s. They were all in college. I was the old lady. And I didn't feel old. I didn't like look down on myself because I knew I had wisdom. Like, I had life experience and I had a traumatic childhood I had just worked through with therapy. So like, even if those things aren't visible to the outside world, I know I'm further ahead because I've worked on myself emotionally. So don't, just wherever you are in your journey, even if it's not showing as further ahead, give yourself credit, have the compassion, but also just keep showing up for the things that you actually have value in, that can pay off in the long run, and put more of those in the more obvious places. Like I said, like set a desk or like make it easier for you to show up to those things. And then don't be rough on yourself when you don't, because it's okay. It'll still be there. It's going to be there forever, and
Yeah.
you've got time. You've got time.
Wow, Julie, that is amazing. I just want to say a massive thank you for being, first of all, educational, but also vulnerable with me and the guests on the podcast, because you've really opened up, and I think a lot of people can take some key lessons and benefit from what you've said. So we've chatted that you have iTunes, Spotify. Is there any other social media platforms where people can find you?
Yeah, you can follow along at youtube.com/JulieMerica if you want to see videos. You can also follow on TikTok or Instagram at MYDB Podcast. I've got all the things there, but you can go to makeyourdamnbedpodcast.com if all of this is too overwhelming, and you can kind of click the links from there, whatever is your vibe.
Awesome. Julie, you've been amazing. Thank you so much. And you have a fantastic day.
Thanks, Nick. You too, bud.
Okay.
Have a good one.
Yes. Bye.
Bye.
For more news and content about Think and Nick, go to www.thinkandnick.com or visit our Facebook or Instagram pages at Think and Nick.